Good morning, small but mighty group of folks. We're excited to have you here for what I think is going to be a very interesting panel called The Social Good Network, How Rising Generations Elevate Dialogue and Democracy with Technology. My name is Kaya Henderson, and I lead the Center for Rising Generations at the Aspen Institute. This is a new center that we're standing up to ensure that leadership is a predictable part of growing up for young people 14 to 24. We believe that you don't have to wait until you're however old to be a leader, that young people are leading right now, and we want to make sure that they have the skills and the opportunities to solve problems for themselves, for their communities, and for the world. And I have two amazing young people who are doing just that. Faith Vieira is the Civic Engagement Manager at Youth Civic Hub, and Cheyenne Chowdhury is the founder of Reach for Help. He's an AI researcher and more, and you're gonna get to spend the morning hearing from them about how they come to this work and how they use technology to drive their work. So I'm gonna ask each of them to just share briefly, what is it that you do in your role at Youth Civic Hub and at Reach for Help?
Hi everybody, I'm Faith. I'm the Civic Engagement Manager at YVote and manage the Youth Civic Hub. And I started at YVote when I don't even know how old I was, but I was in high school and I started as a participant and I went away to college and I came back as a facilitator. And then I just kind of worked up and now I'm a full-time worker and I deal with partnerships and I manage the Youth Civic Hub, which is a digital tool that was made by Youth for Youth to increase civic access to civic information at a more digestible capacity for youth. We have a team of about 9 to 12 young people working on our team. They create the content, they do the outreach, and they program the website. So yeah, it's a really nice place to work, I think.
Tell a little bit about what YVote does.
Yeah, so YVote is a civic education organization for young people, for high schoolers, and we have several programs that speak about democracy, current events, social media, and kind of giving you the tools to really navigate that. And then the Youth Civic Hub came from that, and the initiative is really a tool that we can use to bring in different communities and spread the mission and values that YVote shares. In communities that are marginalized, communities that don't have access to a lot of civic engagement or a low youth voter turnout.
Thank you. Cheyenne, tell us a little bit about Reach for Help.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Kaya, for inviting me here. I've been very fortunate to meet some of you guys. I'm relatively new to this space, so thank you for being patient with me. I'm Cheyenne. I run Reach for Help. I started it back during COVID. And essentially what we do is we're a data-driven disaster response nonprofit / like tech nonprofit. So what do we do? What do those 4 words basically mean? To demonstrate, I'll give you a brief example of what we did during COVID and then like what we've been doing since then. So basically what we do is we map out where people need help and then we map out who can help and then sort of bridge those 2 things together. So in India during COVID when the Delta wave peaked around like 2021, kind of a resurgence in COVID, there were a lot of people who required medical assistance and aid in remote, rural parts of the country in India. So there was one lovely lady who I got to know very closely. Her name was Monu. She is currently like 68 years old, and at the time, she actually needed oxygen cylinders after contracting COVID. And she was in this remote part of Jaipur, and wasn't able to get one, so her nephew Rajiv called like a call center that was based in Mumbai asking for oxygen cylinders, and they didn't have any at the time in Mumbai, which was very far from Jaipur. So what we did is we connected Rajiv and Monu to a host of different organizations. One of them was like an organization that looks for like different resources. Another one, which is a student-run group that like had drivers so that they could deliver resources to Monu. And so what we do is we kind of like find these different points of who can help, and many times that requires multiple different organizations kind of put together to actually get critical resources to people in need. And then we've scaled that up to Bangladesh during the floods, working with governments, civil society agencies, the UN, et cetera. And yeah, kind of putting together, doing a lot of data-driven understanding of what is happening around the world and being able to map that out and push resources in the direction that they need to be, often in rural and underserved communities.
Thank you. So this is a technology conference. This is where EdTech comes to play. Talk a little bit about the role that technology plays in helping Reach for Help do its thing.
Yeah, of course. So my background is in computer science. I'm currently a college student at Columbia, and also I do on the side like AI research at Harvard Med, mostly in like medical AI. So my background's completely computational. So I come at the area of disaster response from a very like tech-centric side. So oftentimes Reach for Help, what we do is we look at data from remote sensing, so satellite information, to census data, to survey data from like local UN workers or NGOs who are working on the ground, and then kind of take all that and piece together where people need help. So for example, in Ukraine, we were working with a couple of different NGOs who were working on the ground as well as the Ukrainian government. And another company, so we use satellite information from NASA, but there was another company called Maxar that has very high resolution images that were able to help us find what's called unexploded ordinances in Ukraine. So that's basically a type of shelling. So when the invasion was happening, oftentimes when bombings happen, there's shellings that don't explode immediately on impact, but they're essentially like a landmine. So what we were able to do was we were able to use these satellite images to find these areas that haven't exploded yet, but there are still people living in those areas. So we need to inform the government and different agencies that are working to evacuate them. And so that requires a lot of analytical capability, image processing, and then of course the outreach to actually work with the people on the ground.
Faith, talk a little bit about how technology powers the work that you do.
Yeah, so unlike Cheyenne, I am not a techie. I have really bad tech skills, but I think that's what makes the Youth Civic Hub so unique, because it is a technology tool, a digital tool, but you don't need to know anything about tech to be able to use it. And so a common question that we're asking is, how can we make this more accessible to people that don't really know anything about tech? And so I have that lens, and I can offer that perspective to people. But what I like about it is that we can take this anywhere. And so we're located in New York right now, and we have the hub in New York, but we can take this to different communities. We can have the smart board or the screen and show this and kind of show kids how to use it on their computer and go to college and access it that way. So I really appreciate the fact that this is such a transferable tool, and we're accessing a lot of different neighborhoods and communities in that way because of it.
So we hear about your generation characterized as the anxious generation. If you go down to the bookstore, there's the anxious generation, there's the disengaged teen book. There are all of these books and assumptions about young people. And I'm honored that I get to work at the Center for Rising Generations because my job is to interact with young people like you. I find that this generation is actually quite engaged, is empowered to solve problems, is interested, is strategic. Talk to me a little bit about your peers and what you are seeing out there from young people.
Yeah, well, I'll set the record, and I will say that I am anxious, but that's okay, and it's okay to lean into what somebody is calling you. It's fine, you know, we don't have to spend our entire time trying to prove that we're not something. It's okay to be anxious, you know. I spoke to my dad this morning, and he was like, once you start talking, you'll really get into your groove, and I find that to be very true with my peers as well. You can be anxious, but once you have actionable steps to conquer something that you're anxious about, the anxiety melts away and you really create some ownership. So that's what we're seeing, that's what we're trying to push, is how do we create ownership so that when you're anxious about something, you can create the actionable steps, you can start to conquer your fears. And I will say that my generation happens to be probably one of the most creative groups of people that I've ever met, you know. Like the things that we do with technology, and we just continue to build and push the limits even higher. It's a wonderful thing to work with. It's a wonderful thing to hear and to listen to all of these things. And I will say that I've walked into rooms where people see that I'm the youngest person and I'm bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. Like, people have told me that so many times, and that's also okay, and that's not something that you want to diminish and push down. You want to encourage that creativity. You want to encourage the technology side to it, you know. We are being raised by adults that didn't have this type of technology, so when we're using AI to answer emails, they're like, oh, you're so lazy, but we're not. We're creative, and we're trying to find different ways to be efficient, and I'm glad that I can be on that little crevice of young adult youth where I can really help to guide the people that are under me. And it's something that I love to do, so I'm very appreciative of my generation.
That's wonderful. I'm a college student, so I'm currently at Columbia, and if anyone's been reading the news, there's been a lot of stuff going on my campus. I actually had a conversation with my mom before I came here, and she told me, so Cheyenne, you're, but by the way, hi, I'm Mu. I'm the one of Halobashi. I love you in Bangla. So if she is watching this, hi. But she told me before I came here, she was like, okay, Cheyenne, you are brown. Your last name is a very Muslim name, Chaudhary. You have a beard, and you're a Columbia student. So picture this. You arrive at the airport, they're gonna profile you. They're gonna say oh, you tick every single box to make you like a suspect so that we should probably ask you questions. I mean, there's been like students who have been detained on my campus, who have been detained at Tufts, who have been detained like all across the country right now, especially international students, I think we are all feeling a lot of anxiety regarding like what we are allowed to say, what we're allowed to express in our kind of day-to-day. And yeah, that's something that resonates very deeply with me, especially having seen it in front of my eyes, like firsthand. So there's certainly anxieties regarding that, but also, as Faith mentioned, we're anxious about many of the different problems that are facing us in the coming years. I mean, anything from like unemployment to a lot of my friends who have been applying for jobs. I'm a junior, so that's a problem for future me. But it's certainly something that is always in the back of your head. Climate change is obviously like there's a lot of studies have shown like 75% of young Gen Z folk have some form of climate anxiety or some doomism. So obviously it's taking a toll on us. But at the same time, I think I've been fortunate to be in a lot of different spaces where I've met a lot of really incredible young people doing just phenomenal things. And I think this is a space where I genuinely do think a lot of young people would benefit from being, and also like the space would benefit from having young people. We've seen a lot of like really incredible products on education, different ed tech tools and platforms, but a lot of them are aimed mainly at young people as kind of the customers, kind of the users of it. I think a lot of times it may be also beneficial to see them as co-creators, because like myself being a young person, there's also people younger than me. I actually met a couple of high school students here, one of them is in the audience, so that's really, really wonderful to see, the fact that there are a lot of young people here. But as Faith mentioned, just echoing that, young people are very creative. Like, people have been using ChatGPT from everything from using homework, doing their homework, to texting your girl, which I may or may not have done, but to like generating Ghibli images, which was the rave on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago. So I think there's an incredible amount of creativity in how young people can use and harness the tools that we essentially grow up with and we use in every single aspect of our life, and how we can kind of apply that. And Reach for Help, we've done that. We are probably one of the younger folks in the disaster response space, so we have kind of been able to use some of the skills in AI and just to be able to use analytical capacities that are often taken for granted in our generation in a very novel space for many folk in my generation and many folk who are already in that space who may not have really considered. So I think there's like a really important factor of like having young people who understand the technology very well at the table, at spaces where oftentimes young people don't really engage much and are not really given a space to engage much.
Mm-hmm. We have, at the Center for Rising Generations, we have a team of 9 people, 6 of whom are what we're calling early career professionals, so that I don't go to HR jail, but they're young people. They are young people who we've hired to co-create this work with, and they tell me all the time that the place that we want to operate is at the intersection of wisdom and imagination. And I was like, am I wisdom and your imagination? They're like, yes. So that's okay. I think a lot about how we work together in co-creation. And as a young leader, Cheyenne, you're operating across different cultures, different contexts. You said you all are one of the younger set of people in the humanitarian aid space. How do you build trust with the communities that you're serving and with the other organizations that you work with?
Yeah, so I think we've had the fortune of working with a lot of different organizations, big and small. I used to work with the UN under UNHCR. I was actually, right after high school, I was stationed in a refugee camp under the UNHCR for the Rohingya refugees, if anyone's familiar with them. So I was living in the camps for a couple of months and was able to, it was like a very fulfilling experience. It's still very close to my heart. And it kind of opened my eyes to what can be done using technology. I'd been interested in technology my whole life, but I'd only kind of seen it from like a kind of a CS bro mentality. But in being in the camps, you got to really see how technology was used to uplift a lot of people who have been marginalized since the 80s for many, many years, and they've been essentially displaced and genocided out of Myanmar into Bangladesh. And I think that context certainly like opens your eyes to, wow, like this is a problem that is happening. You can read about it in the news, but obviously seeing it in person is very, very impactful. And also having worked across different sectors from Bangladesh again in the floods, to Ukraine, to LA when there's wildfires, to earthquakes in Mexico and Oaxaca. So my team and I, we get to work a lot with these groups. In many cases, they come from very different backgrounds. Some of them are super technical. Some of them are people who have barely ever used a cell phone or use internet. So in many cases, like the way to build trust oftentimes, there's two main points. One of them is reducing the amount of friction. So many cases, myself being a kind of a tech person, oftentimes we like to over-engineer solutions. We like to build like a fancy tech platform with like a really fancy UI and cool AI stuff and just pop it in a package and then send it to people. And they're like, yo, I don't have internet. Like, yo, I don't have a laptop. This is actually like studies, Pew Research actually found that roughly, I have some stats, maybe I'll pull it up, being the nerd that I am. But there's, in parts of like the rural South here, approximately 38% of black residents in the rural South don't have broadband access. And in parts like Mississippi, 43% of residents don't have broadband access and don't have a laptop. So imagine like building an ed tech platform and then having all these bells and whistles and then giving it to people who have no access to education or very reduced access to education, a platform that requires them to have technology and access to resources that they don't have. And I think that's really important, like having a way to create a system that's frictionless, that allows them to use the tools that they use. So sometimes it could be like pen and paper. Oftentimes that's what we do. Like we have the way we collect some information about where people need help. It could just literally be people write down a bunch of unstructured notes. And now with language models, it's been really easy to take all that information, kind of standardize it in our own pipeline, but still allow these organizations to do the same kind of operations that they've been doing without us butting in and say like, hey, you have to use our Google form or our spreadsheet or our form or our application. So I think that's really important, like the lack of friction. And the other thing is building sort of equity across the larger organizations and the smaller ones. So many cases, larger organizations or governments, they have a lot of resources, but they don't really understand the local context that many of these organizations do. So these organizations could be anything from like churches, synagogues, mosques, or like student-run groups that organize entirely on WhatsApp. And they have grown up there their entire lives. They understand, they know their leaders, they know they are their leaders, and in many cases, they know everybody in their entire town. So I think also trusting them to know what's best for themselves is a really important way to build trust. To kind of build these bridges between like government officials to say like, hey, we know that you know what your people need, so we'll give you all the resources you need. Just let us know what you need and let us know what you're doing with that in whatever fashion you want to, and we will just get it to you. So I think that's like an important way to reduce any kind of friction and also give them the agency that they need to affect their own communities.
Thank you. Faith, we are having lots of conversations right now, I wonder why, about civic education. And usually when you think about civics, you think about a government class in high school that bored you to death with the 3 branches of government and yada, yada, yada. Tell me a little bit about how the Youth Civic Hub differs from traditional civic education approaches.
Yeah, well, for starters, we're youth-led, so there's 2 kind of compartments for the Youth Civic Hub. On the workforce development side, we have the youth that are creating the content, doing the outreach, programming the website. And I think that really adds some credibility and trust, as Cheyenne was saying, to the work that we're pushing out because it's coming from someone that looks like the consumer. And then on the other side, we're reaching out to youth that are looking for a little bit more clarity on what civics could look like. I had a conversation with the Office of the Community Liaison in New York, and he was a community organizer in the Bronx. And I'm talking about civics, and I'm like, you know, we do democracy projects, and we're talking about voter registration. And he was like, well, my population really cares about public safety, and that's what civics looks like for them. And that really like opened up my mind to what civics really could be. I mean, I knew that it could be issue-based, but I didn't realize that the population that we're talking to really matters so much in the communities, because civics could look like many, many things in different communities. And so what we're seeing with the push with the Youth Civic Hub is that it can be issue-based, and we actually just relaunched our issue-based guide, shout out to my content team, yesterday, and it's for the mayoral election. So we focus on 5 key topics: reproductive rights, climate justice, education, economy, and gun control. And the mayoral candidates that are going to be competing against each other, we have their stances on all of those 5 topics. So anybody can go on our website, we could look up the issue-based guides and see where all of those people stand. And what we're seeing right now within civics is a really robust amount of information that's coming out. Like, we're seeing an information overhaul, and not just for youth, but for adults as well. Like, if I hear terrorist one more time, like, I don't know what I'm going to do. But the anxiety comes from the information overhaul and no action. Like, we're seeing all this stuff in the news, but we don't know what we can do with it. The Youth Civic Hub is different because we provide information and actionable things. Going back to the mayoral election that's coming up, we have the issue-based guides, we have that information, but then also on our opportunity board, we have mayoral forums that are coming up. So you could attend this mayoral forum and use our issue-based guides to look at the information and start to create informed questions and talk to the mayoral candidates through the mayoral forum that's on our opportunity board. So we're trying to combine those two and package it in a way to lessen the anxiety that our generation is experiencing. And so that's how we really differ from the traditional model. So we can be in classrooms and have that information. And once that class is done, you think everything is over. And then at 4 p.m. on Thursday, you get a newsletter and you have the opportunities in your inbox. And so that's how we're following up to not only provide information, but create actionable steps that lessens anxiety and encourages people to create community projects and really just never stop thinking about civics, I don't think. But it's a way of life. It's constantly ingrained, and it's not something that we could ignore anymore. But if we have a system that's digestible and it's friendly and it's open and it's fun and it's warm and it's community oriented, I think we'll start to see more people not only interested but also active and engaged in civics.
Can you give us an example of a community project that really made you proud that came out of the Youth Civic Hub?
Oh boy, there's so many that I can talk about. Actually, happening tomorrow, I'm not going to be there, unfortunately, but we have a partnership with the Brooklyn Public Library, and that's a really proud partnership that we just formed. And a couple of people, our facilitators, are going to do a voter registration drive there, pre-registration, voter registration. And even though that's a typical lens of civics, then we do a follow-up. So Why Vote's slogan, or our logo, says "at and beyond the ballot box." So we can start with the ballot box with the voter registration because that's what people typically know civics to be, and it's circling around the news. But then we go beyond the ballot box, and the next step that we could talk about is, what are you interested in? What do you want to talk about? And we can start to build the steps to create that. So our youth are going to be at Brooklyn Public Library tomorrow doing a voter registration workshop, and we're going to start to create those conversations and those partnerships and those relationships. And then people are going to start to feel comfortable and say, hey, you know what? I really want to get involved in my community and build a garden or something and provide resources to my neighbors in a way. And we'll say, okay, well, look at our power map, and you can see what local official has the same interest as you. And then it takes off from there.
Cheyenne, tell us about a project that you are most proud of that you were able to accomplish through Reach for Help.
I mentioned a couple of stuff, like the project we did in Ukraine and also in India that I'm particularly proud of. But as a Bangladeshi myself, I grew up there for half my life before I moved to New York. Uh, I was like very fortunate to be able to work with a lot of folks there, especially from my days at the UN working there. Um, Recently, if any of you have heard of news coming out of Bangladesh over last summer, there's been a it's been a tumultuous political period. We had a revolution that then overthrew the previous government, and now there's a new government, and there's been a lot of political turmoil going on in the country, unfortunately. But regardless of that, climate change isn't really stopping. So there's still disasters happening. There's still a large amount of people who are being displaced, who are being affected by these disasters, and that's something that, given the turmoil in the government, it made it much more difficult to actually get aid to people out in those areas. So last year, around June and then August, there was another big flood. A lot of my extended family members, they live in Sylhet, they live in parts of the country that are generally really affected by floods. And so oftentimes, like that, last year was particularly challenging because you don't really have any kind of infrastructure after the government was essentially torn down. A lot of public infrastructure was kind of being rebuilt from the ground up. And what we had to do is we kind of had to rebuild our own network of different organizations. So there's still like some NGOs that work there, such as BRAC and Jago Foundation, and smaller NGOs that are like my friends, basically, who I grew up with. And we were able to kind of band together. It was obviously much more challenging, and we were able to kind of band together a group of different people who are very passionate about wanting to help in different households, and we were able to acquire, like during the floods, obviously you have to map out where people need help, but also make sure you're able to get things. And so there were a couple of organizations, Jago, BRAC helped us with like fundraising, and we also like started a GoFundMe and whatnot. So you have to first of all bring in funds. Next, you have to figure out how to get the resources that you buy with the funds. So anything from dry food, clean water, menstrual products for women in those areas, to actually get it to them. And then Jago and a couple of other groups, we basically found like lifeboats, and then we're able to distribute them to like different shelters that were all across the parts of like outside of Sylhet. And I think it was like a big testament to show that even in an extreme amount of turmoil and instability, which is happening quite in a lot of places around the world right now, we're seeing kind of a pattern of democratic backsliding, of a lot of protests and revolts happening around the world. Despite that, there's still a glue that kind of gels people together during times of crisis that allow us to be resilient even in the face of like larger and larger, more and more severe crises, from climate change to unemployment to et cetera. So I think it's something I'm quite proud of, especially because it's in my own home and it's people I grew up with, it's people I really deeply admire.
So this is an education-focused conference. How do you think some of the approaches that you've used at Reach for Help could address educational inequities, especially in vulnerable places?
Yeah, so while we use a lot of like remote sensing data, it's not very feasible to use like satellite imagery to figure out where people don't have educational access. But there are a couple of different metrics. Like generally speaking, when you do disaster response, a large metric that we use is socioeconomic data. And oftentimes, like the people who are affected by climate disasters are people who are generally in lower socioeconomic brackets. And so you see, especially in like rural and agrarian areas, people depend on livestock, people depend on like agriculture for their entire livelihoods, and also like play a pretty big role in the economy. So oftentimes climate disasters destroy their entire livelihood. And so not only are they like losing their homes, not only are they displaced for a little bit, but when they come back after the floods are all gone, after the droughts are done, now they're basically back in poverty. And I think that's a really important thing to recognize, that in the US as well, like with Hurricane Helene and Milton, where we worked with a couple of different agencies here and organizations, the people who are affected, predominantly Black and Latino communities, when they come back, that's when like their lives are essentially turned upside down. And so now they have to rebuild, they're sent back in poverty. If you think about like the hierarchy of needs, now education is not really like of utmost concern. Now it's like actually putting food on the table, getting a job, making sure your kids are able to like have a meal for the next day. So I think like it's really important to understand that often these systematic issues are exacerbated with climate change, and education is like a really important thing. And sort of mapping out where access to education. I mentioned there's certainly statistics on specific demographics like Blacks and Latinos in the rural South that don't have access to education. I think it's really important that using the data-driven approach that we at Reach for Help sort of pride ourselves on, we use that data and be able to make targeted sort of interventions in those areas. So like I mentioned, the frictionless approach, in many cases where people don't have computers or access to internet, how can we utilize something like a telephony-based system where in Bangladesh there's actually a way for people to like access commodities or access education just by like using a phone. If you have a cell tower, which is quite common in the US, if you utilize AI, yesterday Andrew Ng talked a lot about like voice-based applications, and I think that's actually a very fundamental approach. Like everybody can talk to some degree. Not everyone might have the ability to access the internet, but if you can get education through your phone, or if you can get access to education through your phone and automate many of those approaches, that can provide a lot of equity to people who might not have the technology to use some of these platforms.
Faith, when you think about shifting the landscape of education from a civics perspective, how could or should education treat civics differently?
I think it needs to be ingrained in the curriculum a lot more. I mean, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We know that there are government teachers and social studies teachers that already have their really creative curriculums that they're designing. And so the real question that we're trying to ask, and I ask in every partnership meeting, is what's the gap? Where can we fit in? And if we're asking more teachers that question, like where can this curriculum fit in? The wonderful thing is that we have a teachers hub. And so like I said, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel and take over from teachers, but we have curriculum there that teachers can download and directly plug in. And so being creative, the creative generation, I'm like, well, how can English teachers use this tool? Do they know students that are interested in civics or interested in a specific issue and don't really know how to guide them? And that's what the Youth Civic Hub is for, being able to reach more audiences, being accessible. And I just want to say very quickly, when I was in college, I had no friends. And don't feel bad for me. I think I'm doing fine now. Don't feel bad. But because I didn't have any friends and I just had a good grade point average, I wasn't aware of what was going on in my community through a peer-to-peer arrangement. And so I didn't have my first internship until I went to graduate school that I had to pay for. I had to pay for that internship just to get class credit. Crazy, I know. But through that internship, I got my first full-time job. And so thinking back now to how we can help youth and really change education through that lens, I'm like, what if other people were talking about opportunities? And what if that was a tool that we can use? So when you see a student that doesn't have a friend and is sitting by themselves, they have this technology, this digital tool that they don't have to really interact with people that much. You don't have to worry about that. But opportunities are coming to your inbox. So this is not just a tool that government teachers, social studies teachers can use. We can really go through the principles and through a top-down mentality to really spread this throughout education and make it something that we're looking at every day.
If you had the resources to grow the Youth Civic Hub nationally, because right now you're just operating in New York, what would that expansion look like?
Well, in an ideal world, we would have a hub in every state, in every city, but realistically, expansion looks like more partnerships, more relationships, more community. And a call to action would be to find some community in civics. And if you don't know where to start, I'm on LinkedIn, you can follow me, and we can have a chat like that. And really, expansion is figuring out where the gap is and adding something to fill in that gap. As I was saying before, information plus action equals less anxiety and more of a structured approach to solving some of the things that we're anxious about. So that's what expansion would look like, having those real life conversations that doesn't feel too overwhelming. And then adding this quickly, I hope, and implementing it into different states and cities so that accessibility is around for everybody, and we're not so overwhelmed with all the information that's coming at us at one time.
Audience, I'm coming to you for questions in 1 minute. Cheyenne, tell me, what is the future of Reach for Help? What is it going to look like moving forward?
Yeah, of course. So I'll be quick because we don't have a ton of time, but essentially I think similar, echoing what Faith just mentioned, partnerships, sort of growing out what we currently have. Like oftentimes, like whenever there's a crisis, it's usually me or like a member of my small team where we just like reach out to people in that area and say like, what do y'all need? And oftentimes like that can get quite draining, especially because like some of our members, like we have a stipend, and some running a nonprofit is often quite stressful, as Kaya can certainly, and both of these people can certainly admit to it. And sometimes like funding can certainly help ameliorate some of those issues, but in many cases, like also having more of a larger network to understand, like, okay, if there's a crisis here, how do we actually tap into the network there easier? That's I think a really big challenge that we want to overcome. Another thing is technology. I think right now, there's a lot of really good stuff in the works in the language model space, and I think we saw it here. But going back to the friction idea, it's not always super great. So like oftentimes you have to like really prompt engineer, and you have to like kind of get it to do exactly what you want to do. So there's been a lot of very interesting stuff I've been just reading in my own research, but also here looking at what Google's been working on, what AWS, what a lot of like these tech companies are working on, especially around like agents, is I think super interesting in a way that allows these models to kind of self-correct themselves and kind of meet the guidelines or rigor that we want in like actual usability and actual high stakes scenarios. So I think improving our partnerships, improving our access to funding and networks, and improving like the access to technology and actual technology that's useful in these kind of scenarios is really important.
Thank you. Audience, questions?
Do I need a microphone?
I think you can just.
Okay. Okay. I wish I had an opera voice. So thank you so much. I am in the right session, and I wish that every person in this conference heard what you just said. I learned a lot. And I am very curious from your experience and struck by something particular you said, Faith, where you say we were raised by, and we are being raised by adults who didn't grow up in this world, like in this what we have now. So I am very curious on your take as to how can you help these adults be better equipped to raise the children that we are raising right now. Like, what's your connection with children, and what's your connection to these adults that are working with children all day, every day?
Yeah, well, first, the work that we're doing is intergenerational. And so I always say youth led because the youth are there and they're doing the work, but the adults have to be there to guide and kind of, I hate to say it, like add credibility. Sometimes people don't take youth and young people seriously, but when they see an adult standing there, like, okay, maybe you have something of value. But it's intergenerational work. And to your point, adults need to be trained the same way that youth need to be trained on how to use these new technologies and tools. Like, I was there when ChatGPT launched. So the assumption kind of is like, oh, you're growing up with it. You don't really need to be trained on this because you're growing as this is also developing. But that's not true. There's always room for improvement, always room to learn. And so this is intergenerational work. We need as much buy-in from the adults and the parents as we do with the young people. And it's something fun to do. I mean, I love my parents, my mom, my dad. They know I'm not ashamed to like interact with them and bring them on and help them and for them to help me. And so going back to what you said about the wisdom and innovation or imagination, yes, exactly. That's a really useful tool. And if everybody can be open-minded to understand that I can learn something from you and you can learn something from me, then I think that we would be in a good place, I think.
You want to weigh in?
Yeah, I totally echoing that. I think the word that comes to mind a lot is humility. I think on both sides, both on the adult side as well as the young people side, because oftentimes we can get in our own head and we're like, damn, we know how all this stuff works. We don't. And also same for adults. Like they say like, oh, you guys are just young folk, you're naive, you don't really know how the world works. Maybe, but you also don't. So I think like that sort of humility is very important on both sides. And as I mentioned, like I think having youth as co-creators, the emphasis on the co part is quite important, because oftentimes you can have young people on a stage, but it doesn't really, like, sometimes they're just tokenized. I mean, I've been at the UN, and no shame at all. But sometimes it does feel like organizations do have youth people on like a panel, like youth advisory committee, but we don't really do a whole lot. So I think it's important to like have people as creators and co-creators in that space instead of just talking and yapping. Another thing that I want to say is, obviously I'm very thankful for Kaya for inviting me here, but also like I've been fortunate to be able to cultivate a network of people, and among youth, it's really important for us to, and kind of overcoming some anxiety as well, is like having a group of people as a support system. And I'm very thankful that Kaya is here. And I just want to shout out Amy Glassman, another wonderful member of Aspen, who introduced me to Kaya and who has been supporting me since a couple of years back in the Aspen Institute's Future Leaders Climate Summit. And I want to extend that to also like other young people. So seeing a high school student here is really inspirational to me, and I hope to see more younger folks, such as myself, such as other people, at these spaces and given the agency to co-create.
Y'all, people ask me all the time, like, how are you managing in this crazy world? And this is how I'm managing. I get to hang out with amazing young people. So join me in thanking my panelists. And these are the ones who are going to save us all. Thank you.
got awkwardly quiet.
Yeah, you know, I just love to ask the audience who you are and what you're doing. So if I take my microphone and just pass it down here while we wait, can somebody pick up the, oh, Mark, you're a perfect person.
Perfect for what? Okay, I'm Mark Schneider. I used to be Mark Schneider, who used to be the director of the Institute of Education Sciences. Now I'm at the American Enterprise Institute.
Three more, please.
Sure. Ladies, gentlemen. Hey, y'all. My name's Greg. I'm from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Woo, doggy. And I'm a technology coordinator there, and I help teachers use tools. And then I also did a contract with Apple doing some tech stuff, and I do stuff with Northwest Council for Computer Education. And I'm passing the mic to someone else. Anyone else? There you go.
There we go.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here. I am surviving last day of the conference. I'm Carla Narowski, and I'm with the Henry Ford just outside Detroit. And two of the things that really fit with this conference is we have our Innovation Atlas, which helps us chart with many data points where are the areas of barriers to innovation in the United States today. And then we have our Invention Convention Worldwide, where we help K through 12 students eventually bring their ideas to market. So we have 19 patents that we've done. So it's a pleasure to be with you.
One more.
Anyone?
Anyone.
Marsha.
Right behind
There you go.
Good morning, everyone. Marsha Francis, Steam Truck, Atlanta, Georgia. We are a fleet of mobile maker spaces. We engage middle school students and their educators in math instruction through making. So I have to talk to you about the Invention Convention.
Awesome. Oh, thank you. It is so exciting to have you here. Every once in a while, I want to win the lottery. And in getting to facilitate this panel, I both get to win the lottery and I get to share it with you at the gasping end of ASU+GSV. So I'm so grateful to our panelists for being here. I'm so grateful for you being here. My name is Bob Hughes. I'm at the Gates Foundation, living in New York City, but we're located in Seattle. Jeff?
I am Jeff Livingston. I lead Ed Solutions, and I'm a proud co-founder of the Center for Education Market Dynamics.
I'm Richard Collada. I'm the CEO of an organization called ISTE and ASCD, two organizations really focused on helping make sure we're creating amazing learning experiences for students in every classroom every day.
And I'm Kristen DeCerbo, the Chief Learning Officer at Khan Academy. We have a mission to provide a free world-class education to anyone, anywhere.
So yeah, I think it's an amazing panel. And one of the questions that always bedevils me at ASU+GSV, frankly, is how do we get to quality? And by quality, I mean efficacy for students sitting in classrooms, UI, UX that's helpful to teachers to enable them to bring out the best in their students and themselves. And actually, how do we set up schools that build cultures that support the use of technology and really smart instruction to enable young people to thrive in our society? And I can't imagine three people who are better to talk about it. So we provocatively started by saying, why is tech not effective? What have we failed to do to really realize the potential of tech before we knew it, and now AI as we kind of stumble into the future? I'll just open up. Who wants to start?
I'll start. I've been coming to this conference for a long time. This might be my 13th, Bob. Might be.
And
Did you used to go when it was in Tempe?
Yes.
I did too.
Yeah.
Sky Song.
And this is, of course, the second most important education technology conference in the country, and I've been going to that one for just as long. And here's a part of the problem that I have seen, Bob. The ed tech market has not prioritized quality. We've been selling engagement. We've been selling clicks and views. We haven't been selling quality. And that is why it hasn't worked as well. That I have been saying from stages like this for a long time now, that the really unfortunate thing that happened during the sort of glory days of the ed tech movement is you could have an idea, get an idea funded, test it in a really representative school, find somebody to buy it from you, and never go more than a mile from the Whole Foods in Palo Alto. right? It was just horrible, right? It was just horrible what was passing for education technology in those days. And I think we have the opportunity now with more engaged, better informed buyers and clear standards about what quality is to do it right at long last.
Richard.
Amen to that. I'm also going to just add from a very practical standpoint, you know, we work with almost every school district in the country, and one of the things that we're seeing over and over again is there's this sort of focus on these long-term impacts, right? What are how are we measuring long-term impacts? Which I'm not saying is a bad thing, by the way, don't misunderstand. But in a lot of other industries, the focus is actually on filtering on the front end. Right, and so I was talking about this. I'm a pilot. I fly planes, and you know, in the aviation industry, before you can put anything onto a plane, if it's a new piece of equipment, if it's a new map software, whatever it is, it has a whole series of baseline threshold meeting requirements that it has to do. It's not super onerous, but you gotta check some boxes. And then we study, hey, does it make flying safe, or does it, you know, do whatever? We do a really terrible job of that in education. And if we do it at all, the burden is placed on districts to do it. So districts are doing all of this work. We did some research that showed that districts spend 40,000 hours reviewing tools and apps before they go in front of kids, which is crazy. In times, whatever, however many 12,000 districts there are in the US alone, that's a lot of time spent not helping kids learn. And so we believe, and we're actually working very hard to do this, that we need to be agreeing on a handful of elements, indicators that companies can show with their products, have them validated by third parties at the beginning before they ever go in the hands of students, and then from there, start your measuring. And I think if you do that, we're actually gonna find that this idea of like, well, there isn't really a significant, actually there's a lot of really good impact that technology makes if you filter out the crap at the beginning, just bluntly.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's this piece of what does quality mean, and that set of things that you've identified include learning, but also include safety,
yep,
and those other things that I think are really important in how we think about quality. I'm going to build off Jeff. You said, you know, we're building for clicks and all of that, but I also think there's another piece that we aren't getting clicks. So when we have something that we know, we can show you the data, like this much practice leads to this much increase in student learning outcomes, but we're getting 10% of kids who get to that level of usage of those tools because there's so much out there in the space that I think it's hard to decide what to use, when to use, how do you implement it in your classroom in a way that gets to those outcomes.
When we were in Arizona at this conference, I used to say that most education technology looks like what 50-year-olds think teenagers want to do.
Yes.
Now it looks like what 35-year-olds think teenagers want to do. That's better, but it's still not good, right? It's still, it's still not good. We're not even good at clicks. That's what's right.
There's a huge signal to noise problem,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
Huge, and what stinks is when you do have organizations, you have companies that are building products and trying to do the right things and really trying to get them ready, have them research-based, all the you know things that we talk about. It's very hard for them to rise above because there's so much noise. And so I think that's another thing that I'd really like us to all be thoughtful about is how can we help when somebody is doing the quote-unquote right thing, right? When they're doing the work to get it right, that it's not so dang hard to find.
Well, you're talking, I want to just zero in on the noise because I think that's a giant question, right? You know, Richard, you've talked about a very fragmented system. We've got an enormous number of consumers. We frequently have purchases that are not by teachers or groups of teachers, but dislocated from what teachers need and are thinking about. You know, and Jeff, you've been thinking a lot about markets and how you create signals. Talk to me, each of you, about how you're thinking about that signal and noise problem. And Kristen, I'm going to just prompt you a little bit, but you'll take it wherever you want to go. What I'm so excited and interested about Con and Conmigo, amongst many things, is that you're really actively involving the consumer and thinking about this to get to Jeff's problem. Like, it needs to work for an 8-year-old. It doesn't need to work for a 35-year-old. And it's unlikely we'll ever get 35-year-olds to do it in the first place.
Yes, and as a 50-year-old now, I'm a little, yeah, that hit a little close to home.
Just wait.
But the point is, quality isn't something that happens at the end after you've built something. Quality happens from the beginning. What is the first learning science that you're basing this on? What is the theory of why you think this is going to improve outcomes for students? And then to get to this idea of how are you going to know if it's going to work in the classroom, you need to be in classrooms as you're designing and as you're building. So we have a number of partners, but one that Bob has visited recently, a couple that he's visited in Newark, New Jersey, and in the New York area, and thinking about they are trying things in their classroom, and then we are there with them saying, how did that work? How could it be better? How can we improve this? Hey, students, what are you doing with it? And I'm kind of watching over their shoulder as they're, saying IDK to conmigo, and I'm like, that's not the best interaction I've seen. But you don't see that until you're in classrooms with students and teachers. And so then if you're doing that, you have a better chance of getting to quality at the end when you get there.
And the way our market works, for my sins, I once headed marketing at a very large publisher. And
We could tell you after the program.
I'll tell you who it is. I mean, some people in the room know who it is. When I did so, I realized that most of my team didn't know who our customer was. They thought our customer was teachers. And I had to be the one to say, Purina has no puppy customers. Baby Gap has no infant customers. And you have no teacher customers. Because very few teachers have anything at all to say about what curriculum shows up in their classroom. We sell to administrators who make decisions and sign purchase orders. That's who we are. And that is the way the business has worked. And if a teacher is happy to, that's great. And I've also admitted in spaces like this that when I was a publisher, if I sold my program and no teacher ever took the shrink wrap off, I still got a bonus. My job was to sell it, not to get teachers to use it. We have to fix that and change those motivations. What I love about what Kristen said was she was in a school in New York and in Newark looking at a product that she knows more about than any other living human, learning how people were actually using it in the wild. She was, and I know which schools you were going to. They took your suggestions as just that and then just adapted it to their culture.
Own thing, yes.
That's right. And the students were doing that too. And you need to see them going IDK, because we didn't say IDK, in the last century when we were,
exactly.
we're their age. And we need, as Richard says, to reward that by making sure that the people who are buying insist upon that, and that there are reliable signals that that has happened, so that you are rewarded for doing the right thing, not just rewarded for having the most Patagonia vest standing next to you in the Grand Hyatt. And if we are deliberate about this, we can make that happen. Right? We can empower the school systems and the teachers to say, no, I need this, and I will pay for this, and only this.
So let me build on that, because I think I'm going to now share something very practical that we're trying to do to help with that. So I will reveal this, especially since Mark is sitting right here. We had something that a lot of money was spent on called the What Works Clearinghouse, at a thing that we used to have called the Department of Education. And the interesting thing about that is there was a huge amount of money. It's not funny yet, I know, sorry. It's really
too soon.
But at the What Works Clearinghouse, this was an idea of being able to help figure out what was working, hence the name, and what wasn't. Unfortunately, it was done in all the wrong ways, and I tried to kill it every year that I was there. Mark tried to kill it every year that he was there. We're from very different political backgrounds. We both agreed on this. We weren't able to get it done. But part of the challenge was it was these big, weird, kind of researchy studies that teachers and school leaders who were making the decisions couldn't understand. They could have if they had time. Nobody had the time to read a 5-hour study on a product. It was not the right way to get this information that Jeff is talking about out in simple ways to decision makers. So here's one attempt that I'll share that we're trying to do. There may be others. I hope there are others, but here's something we're doing. We've just launched a site called EdTech Index, edtechindex.org. You can go take a look at it. And what we have done is we have assigned a unique identifier to every EdTech product. So if you're familiar with Amazon, everybody thinks Amazon's amazing and does great stuff and has all this information. Well, the key with Amazon is something called the AIN. It's their product ID number. When you punch that into a product, it pulls all the information in, right? That's where all the cool data comes from. We're trying to do the same thing in the EdTech space. So we've assigned every product a unique identifier, and then any organization that has credibly reviewed the product. I say credibly. We review if there's a credible review for safety, for accessibility, for research base, for usability. If there's any credible review, we will align those reviews to those products. And so you can go in and you can punch in a product. Book Creator is one I just recently saw. You punch in Book Creator and it'll pop up and it will say, it has been validated by a third party that it is safe, interoperable, usable, and research-based. And if you click on it, it will tell you who the validator was. That is the sort of market tool that in almost every other industry exists. It has not yet existed in the education space. We're trying really, really, really hard to make it happen. We're not doing it on our own. We have partners with a whole bunch of organizations, Digital Promise, COSIN, CETA, One Ed Tech, a bunch of others that are collaborating with us to make it happen. But our hope is that if we can just get more transparent about the data, it'll be easier to make some of these decisions without spending hours and hours and hours reading information that's really confusing.
So let me just push a little bit and be devil's advocate.
Yep.
We're talking about products that are evaluated through RCTs, which takes a lot of time, costs a lot of money. Lots of people claim they do them really poorly, point one. So I wonder if you can actually get to a viable airplane through an RCT process, or what other process you might need to start to validate enough to move. And secondly, one of the things, Chris, I've learned from you in walking through First Avenue Academy and a number of schools that are working with Conmigo is how attentive you are to implementation every single minute in the classroom. And I've watched, honestly, 50-minute periods fall apart and result in 15 minutes of instruction when there's a broken protractor. And we have 47 different products in schools. Many of them, as Jeff said, sit in shrink wrap. Like, how are we going to get to notions of quality that are widely held, particularly in environments where teachers don't pay attention to what we do, they listen to other teachers? There was a lot there, so take it wherever you want to go.
Absolutely. So I think the difficulty is, so I'll say probably 6 weeks after we launched Conmigo, I got the first person asking me if we had an RCT on whether Conmigo was impacting random, learning outcomes, and I was like, it's been 6 weeks. And I get that people want that standard of evidence and what that is, but there's so much variability in classrooms and so much variability in how things are implemented. You can do a very small study over 4 weeks, and you're going to have 100 students in this group and 100 students in this group, and we're going to see the impact of what that is. That's not going to generalize into the real world of instruction and what people are doing. So we have, on purpose, spent this first year and a half thinking about the implementation. How are teachers using this? How are students using this? And what do we think are the ways that we think are likely to have those impacts, so that by the time we get to running those really big and expensive studies, and we want to do them on thousands and thousands of kids, we're doing it in a space where we feel like we understand what's happening in classrooms, and we can capture some data about that along the way, not just what is their final test score.
Can I build on this and maybe throw some more grenades at the idea of RCTs? Because I think the big challenge with most, there's so many challenges with applying RCT styles to the type of evidence that we're looking for. But let me just share two. One is the challenge that they largely don't take into consideration context, right? And so my good friend and former boss, Jim Shelton, used to always say the biggest problem is that the RCTs on ed tech show that nothing works anywhere because nothing works everywhere. right? Because we do these sort of, try to be like sterile and be like, well, it shouldn't matter the context, it should just work anywhere. But we know that's not true. We know that a tool or an app that it may work very well in a case where you have an experienced teacher with deep content knowledge in certain populations, where it doesn't work in a context where you have a teacher with limited knowledge dealing largely with English language learners, right? Like context matters, and RCTs just don't take that into consideration enough. But the other challenge is they are intentionally designed to measure something that is inherently stable, right? So how many of the apps and tools, we just, some of you were out here looking at these apps or the other day here at the air show down the road, right? These are apps where like every night they're rolling out new features and figuring out what's, what it's gonna look like, largely based, a lot of those apps are just kind of prompts sitting on top of an LLM. And so anytime one of the LLMs updates, bam, all these new features. So whatever you were studying 8 months ago when you started this study doesn't even matter because it's not in the program anymore, right? It's like, so it's just this weird misalignment. Now, what that doesn't mean is there isn't ways to collect evidence, right? There's lots of ways. The first, as you keep hearing me say, is don't even think about measuring impact if you haven't at least measured to make sure that the inputs are right. We know that a lot of things need to exist before you should ever put it in front of a kid, so start there. And then the second is you can use some of these digital technologies to instrument, right? To be able to pull, you all do a great job of this, to be able to pull data about what's working. That's a far better way to instrument and to show evidence of a tech product than an RCT that will tell you that the product that doesn't exist now was good 3 years ago.
Here. So not enough bricks have been thrown at RCT, so I'm going to throw some too.
Keep going.
The question being asked by the people with PhDs running the RCT is not the same question being asked by the classroom teacher. The classroom teacher is asking questions like, what the hell should I try with my third graders who were never kindergartners next week? What's worth trying to save their academic lives? Not, what in 20 years should I look back and wish I had done with them, right? There is this weird, there's this weirdness. And, let's not let the customers off the hook. Now, rumor has it that someone who used to run marketing at a large publisher was required by a state full of large districts to publish a book of all the efficacy studies for what he was selling. He may have put, rumor has it, on 20 pages of that book, nothing but his email address. That may have happened 15 years ago and no one has ever emailed that email address. That might have happened. That might have happened somewhere. So if the RCT is just a checkbox, it exists and nobody looks at it, nobody knows that it's measuring things that are not in the product anymore, then that's not good enough, right? That's not even close to good enough there. Teachers trust other teachers. Teachers trust only other teachers. They don't care what the senior professor at the university thinks about this. They care if Mr. Johnson, who is teaching students just like mine across town, had some efficacy, then that is worth trying. So we have got to be able to share those signals better, faster. We have got to say, this is worth trying, and you will help us get it better. I have tried several times to help developers and researchers come up with test beds in order to test, and teachers keep saying, I do not have time to play these games with a tenure committee. I have kids whose lives are dependent upon whether I can teach them fractions this year, right? And that gap is something that we really need to get over. So I was cheering you on when you were trying to kill the What Doesn't Work clearinghouse, and I was cheering you on when you were trying to kill the What Doesn't Work clearinghouse. I am not cheering on the people who finally are killing it, but I am not. But we do at least get to build back. When we get on the other side of this, we need a research and development system that does the basic science, that tests features, that leads to products that actually get into classrooms while students who are in school are still in school. And I think we have not only the opportunity, but therefore the obligation to do that, quite frankly.
Amen.
I'll say, no, that did deserve a clap.
Yeah.
Come on. I'll say this too, because I know there are product developers in the room. I know there are product developers in the room, because there are always product developers in rooms like this. I invite you to put your money where your mouth is. In this building, on another panel right now, is my friend Brittany, who runs the Outcomes-Based Contracting Center at the Southern Education Foundation. If you believe your product works, then enter into a contract that says, this is the basic price, and if we meet the standards that we agree upon, this is the higher price. Do that, right? Put your money where your mouth is. And if you do that a couple of times, then teachers will start telling other teachers, and administrators will start telling other administrators. And I believe, as a student of markets, that is more important to getting the good stuff to the kids than one set of PhDs telling another set of PhDs that, you know, I actually saw that book that someone may have published in a superintendent's office on a bookshelf last year. I was looking at it and I was like, oh, that's what that is. And, you know, and I walked and I saw, oh, okay, the dust, right. Really do that, right? Let's leverage those market forces. If you believe you have built a better mousetrap, get paid for whether it catches mice.
Gosh, I feel like I'm in church. I am so glad you're here. Let's flip the switch a little bit. You're on the other side of the table. We're with developers. I would love to challenge ASU+GSV to next year have a third of the audience be teachers and students. A colleague walked through the air show with his son on Sunday, and he would lean over and say, Dad, this will never work. They're not thinking about this and this and this. And I think we just need to kind of build on Kristen's point, think and listen much more. One of the things we've been noticing at the foundation, if you haven't heard, we're really into math for the next decade. And one of the things we're really paying attention to is, what do users say are the challenges they face in the classroom? So don't design the product in the absence of the use case. Understand what the use cases are. Understand the barriers in the classroom to implement those uses, and then really study the heck out of it. Example, Los Angeles, 50% of the teachers we surveyed say they're really uncomfortable dealing with kids 1, 2, 3, or 4 years behind. Hey, guess what? That's 80% of the students that we care about. And we aren't seeing products, groups of products, interoperability, playing and trying to address that need. And if we don't start to pay attention to that, we're going to continue to bombard product and see no efficacy. And we're going to lose the teachers and administrators we need, because they're going to burn out. They're not going to use this. We're going to get more resistance to the kinds of transformational change that we need in classrooms. But let me switch. You're on the other side. You're a buyer in a district, and you really deeply believe in your teachers, you understand your context, and you're thinking about efficacy. How do you wade through all that noise to find the signal you need?
Look, I think you bring a really good point, which is we have not done enough. We're talking a lot about building better products. We also need to build better buyers, right? We haven't done enough to help them have more meaningful conversations. Let me share one example of something that we're testing this year. And I have a bunch of people saying, this is a crazy idea, you may go out of business for it. And I'm like, it's the right thing to do, we're gonna take the chance. So we have this weird conundrum, this really weird thing that happens in events. We have events like ours. So Jeff mentioned a minute ago, we have this event called ISTE Live. It's a great event, y'all should come. It's in San Antonio in end of June. I just got a little plug in there for that. But the reason I'm mentioning that is we have all these events that have some version of an expo floor. an expo hall, right? And we do too. ISTE Live, we've had it for years. And we sit in our high and mighty conversations here, and all these panels are and go, oh, you shouldn't you could put apps in front of kids if they haven't met blah, 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 and all the things that they're supposed to meet. And then we go around and say, do you know what the requirement was to be able to show an app at the ISTE Expo Hall? Paying your bill on time. That's it. We take anything as long as you pay the check. We'll put you a slot on the floor. How can I sleep at night if we're doing that? And so we made a change this year. It's the first year where we've now said, and we're doing carrot and stick. So this year it's carrot. We're saying anybody who can demonstrate that they have validated, they've gotten some efficacy, some validation either on the front end, they've validated for some of the areas that we've talked about, or any impact measures of their products get preference for when and where they get to show on the floor. Nobody has ever done that in an education event before. And now our hope is that's year one. We're going to notch that up next year, a little more. To the point is, we want to make sure that there won't be anybody who can get onto our expo floor if they haven't at least demonstrated that their app has reached a certain level of quality. That is not happening anywhere else in the entire world that we've been able to find up until this point. And that's insane. And so we hope that that will be a way that we can help. And the other thing that we're doing this year is that we're actually putting information on the expo floor that are tips for asking better questions for those buyers coming through. Here's a question you might ask. If they ask how it works, ask it in a more specific way. We are trying to train people as we're literally giving them little pieces of paper, like little cue cards. We're feeding them with lines, right, to ask better questions. And I hope it's a small shift, but I hope that will start to get a little bit better at taking more seriously this process of figuring out what's really a good product and what isn't.
I did call this the second most important education technology conference. I did say that. I didn't, and I think that those question guides, you know, there are a bunch of math adoptions happening in the next few years here. There is a campaign called HQIQ, High Quality IQ, that is helping people who go onto that floor ask questions about the quality of the math program, ask specific questions about specific features designed for specific students. That work might be being funded by a large foundation that cares a lot about math, might be. But maybe those kinds of market signals that help people be better buyers, ask the right questions, make it harder for people like I used to be, who I was really good at selling vaporware. It makes it harder. And it changes the market dynamics, and it makes you end up having to be nearly as good as Kristen is to get taken seriously by real customers on those things. And I think that is how we do it, Bob. I think that's how we do it. We help people get smarter, because when educators find what they want, they will tell other people. Now, I have to push back at you a little bit. No. And I know that surprises you a lot, Bob. When Kristen and I were in Arizona at this thing, they used to round up teachers and bring them to this thing. They hated the hell out of this conference. I literally watched 50 teachers leave Scottsdale and go to the Grand Canyon in the middle of this conference a decade ago.
I used to do that at Gates convening.
I was about to say, you know, only some teachers want to be here, making sure that the ones who want to be here are here in more abundance. Yeah. But just teachers, they liked the air show because it was like, show me some new stuff, let me ask some questions. But, you know, they have a very, very low Patagonia vest quotient, the tolerance level that they can
Point taken. Totally agree.
Kristen. I think on this evidence piece, to get like a little in the weeds on it, it is a tough problem because it is easy to look like you have evidence. You can, here's your one-pager, look, there's a bar chart here, and it's seen, there's one bar that's low and there's one bar that's high.
And an email address.
That's okay.
Found book full of email addresses.
Right. There's also a lot of things like this will produce 6 months more of learning. If you talk to anyone who's a statistician or works in thinking about how we get those kinds of numbers, everyone will tell you those kinds of grade level estimates are completely crap, frankly. Like, you can't say that in any way that's meaningful. But that sure sounds good. And I have talked to the people in the marketing departments when I maybe used to work at a publisher who were like, we have to say this. Somehow get us a number we can say about how many months growth of learning students will have. And I was like, they're like, that's what people want to hear. And it doesn't mean anything. And so it is the case that the people that are really doing this right are doing it in ways that aren't really clearly communicatable to other people. And we've got to keep thinking about how to build a bridge so that people can see through just the kind of gauzy evidence to what's real and what isn't.
That's really helpful. And I just want to call out Khan. Lots of people call out Khan for lots of things, good and bad in some cases. But it's one of the few grants we've had where Khan came to the table at the Gates Foundation and said, we want to be held accountable for outcomes, and made commitments in their grant agreement to raise student achievement. And we, like Richard, we're just starting in this process, and we're going to start to notch that up. Final question from me, and then just an opining on AI. But one of the things we don't talk about in instructional materials is whether they're motivating, engaging, and lead to student persistence. And that's part of the quality conversation that I haven't heard a lot of. And Lawrence Holt, a colleague to all of us, has really talked about the 5% problem, particularly in digital materials, where kids will, if they have the full dosage, they'll do fine, but most kids aren't getting the full dosage. And one of my theories, and I just want to test this out for all of you, and I'm going to choose my language very carefully, is motivation absolutely requires that you pay attention to the history and experience of young people that tool is designed to meet. That means you're thinking about communities, you're thinking about language, you're thinking about the experiences of that student outside of the school and classroom, and you're designing that product to address that student where they are in the reality of where they are. And I'm worried right now in all the swirl that we're going to get to a place where we're talking about generic kids and we're not personalizing in that way. And AI may get us there, other things may get us there, but I think we have to make a commitment to the kids and their context in real ways, regardless of what external forces are saying. Talk to me a little bit about that.
I absolutely agree. I think the thing that I have said most consistently from stages like this over the many, many years that I have been doing it is, if you are solving problems for yourself or for your children, you are probably solving the wrong problems. I've gotten to the point that when I hear someone on a stage like this say, at my school, or when I was a student, I say a little prayer for mercy, because something really shitty is about to happen to poor kids when that happens. We can innovate on behalf of other people as long as we remember that they have their own context and we are not substituting our anecdote for their data. And I'll even attach this to the AI portion, and Kristen has heard me say this before. If ChatGPT or Conmigo had existed in the mid-1980s, I would have been the happiest black nerd in South Carolina, bar none. I would weigh 100 pounds less today because I would have been forgetting to eat. I would have been translating the Bible into Yoruba from morning to night. I was that kid. I knew in the 1980s that I was weird. Because I don't live in Palo Alto or Menlo Park, I know I'm still weird. Too many people who do live in Palo Alto or Menlo Park, because their neighbors are weird too, have forgotten that they are weird. And that human beings are not actually, and this is important for us to remember in this room, nobody is trying to engineer out the humans from their education. Nobody. They like their teachers. They like the person sitting next to them. They really like the cute boy across the room. Learning is a collective communal process. And to your point, Bob, part of what we have to do is remember that people don't think in terms of standard 1.4876. They don't learn in those ways. They don't do it that way. It is in conversation, it is holistic, it is across discipline, it is story-based, it is contextual to their lives, and it is our responsibility to give them what they want, not pretend that they are more robotic than they are and give them what we think they should have.
Yeah, the other piece, though, about the teachers, and we can talk about motivation and engagement of individual students, but in our data, we see the biggest predictor of whether a student is using Khan Academy a lot is whether their teacher has asked them to use Khan Academy. And so teachers are really powerful in terms of what students do in classrooms, and we can put all the things that are personalizing, but that is a whole classroom that's working together, and we need to not just think about, I think, the individual student, but the teacher, and what is the teacher trying to accomplish in the classroom too.
So let me just end with two very quick strategies that are helpful at doing what we're talking about here. And so some of you may know I used to work for a company called IDEO. IDEO is a design thinking firm. They kind of really invented this concept of design thinking and user-centered design. Anyway, two strategies that are very helpful that you may. The first one is we had a rule at IDEO called no generic users. We were never allowed to talk about generic users like, oh, students want ... That's a generic user, right? Parents are asking for, you're not allowed to ever use generic users at IDEO. So one of the things that we have to do is we have to say, Chris from Westfield Elementary was telling me that he's frustrated with this opportunity that he's learning about, right? That's a non-generic user, right? Jane, who is the mom of 3 kids that are in these schools that don't seem to be getting these concepts in math, right? So that's the first one. If you find yourself using generic users, students want, teachers want, stop. Just do a timeout. It's okay. Just be like, hey, timeout. Sorry, I blew it. Let me go back. And if you don't have a real user case to fill in there, then you need to pause and go to my second strategy, which is user shadowing. One of the most powerful things that we can do is spend some time just observing the students, if that's who your audience is, teachers, if that's who it is. We do a thing at ISTE and ASCD every year. We shut down for an entire day, and our whole team of 200 people goes out and shadows a teacher in a real school, and we have a rule that it cannot be a school that your kid is in. So they have to go and shadow a teacher and just observe. If you're talking with students, you do the same thing with students. Just observe, right? Just learn what they're experiencing. It is amazing to see what happens when people like me. I worked in school. Most of the people on my team worked in education for years. And when we go out and we shadow a real, living, breathing teacher for a day, I come back and I go, I had no idea. Stuff changes so fast. I had no idea what their experience was. I had no idea how hard it was to log in to this tool. I had no idea how long a student waited, how little interaction they had with a human in the system. That is a really good strategy. And so no generic users, and if you're finding yourself not having the stories to fill in, if you're reverting to generic users, then pause for a minute and do some work, whether it's user shadowing or other things, do some work to get real human stories that you can use to help inform your decisions.
We are at time. This is fantastic. Building on the religious themes that Jeff always brings into I was thinking about, Cousin Zakis has a wonderful work on St. Francis. And one of the things he says is, maybe God is just the search for God. And as long as you have a pure heart and are committed to that, I think that may be true. So I think that quality in some ways may always be a process towards quality, with transparency, with multiple voices, with clear frameworks and clear data. But we're going to continue to have to evolve and continue to have to drive this train, because the kids we have are the kids we have. The kids we have, we are lucky to have. In fact, the kids we have, we're blessed to have. And our job is to design learning experiences to enable them to thrive. So thank you very much.
Amen.
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 Thank you.